1. The regular beat of the stroke drums of Cleopatra's royal barge drifted across the sapphire waters of the Nile. Twin rows of oars dipped in and pulled in time, driving the stately craft up the broad, slow river towards Rosetta. From the canopied deck, thin streamers of sweet incense billowed and spread in its wake, whilst two slave girls leaned over the prow, casting handfuls of fluttering petals onto the waters before them. Sunlight glinted off the barge's golden ornamentation and glowed on its brilliant paintwork. On the riverbank, the sunlight also glinted off a telephoto lens, protruding through the scrubby grasses that capped a low sandhill. The sound of a camera shutter clicking rapidly could be heard. Behind the screen of grasses, the young woman operating the camera brushed a strand of her dark, collar-length hair back beneath her sun hat, adjusted the focus, and shot another series of pictures. By her side, a tall man also lay prone, observing the scene through a long, brass-bound 19th-century naval telescope. Gradually, the drumbeat faded away as the barge shrank in the distance. The woman lowered her camera, revealing keen, attractive features, dark eyes, and a delighted smile. "Cleopatra's own personal royal yacht," she exclaimed, speaking in a light American accent. "And I've got it on film." She paused thoughtfully for a moment, then chuckled ruefully. "I guess nobody'll believe me even so. Will they, Doctor?" Her companion lowered his spyglass and regarded her with mild reproach, his brow furrowing beneath his mop of curled, honey-tinted hair. He spoke in precise tones, like a kindly but censorious schoolmaster. "My dear Perry, I sincerely hope you do not intend to exhibit those photographs to all and sundry when you return home. I only agreed to you bringing that camera on the understanding that any pictures remained private. Have you any notion of the potential temporal paradox arising from a society discovering proof that time travel is possible before it should? Besides," he added, a hint of exasperation entering his manner, "is it not enough that you know what you've seen?" He shook his head in apparent despair. "Really, I take you to witness a little-known historical incident, namely the preparatory cruise of Cleopatra before her journey to Tarsus and her epic meeting with Mark Antony, and you are more concerned with the record of the event than the experience of actually being here." Perry grinned. She was getting used to the doctor's minor impassioned outbursts by now, and had learned not to take them to heart. She responded with carefully judged innocence. "But, Doctor, you never really explained why she came here." The stern schoolmaster became an eager lecturer. When it suited him, the doctor delighted in disseminating knowledge. Well, this was purely to rehearse her arrival in Tarsus. Remember, she had been summoned by a triumvir, one of the most powerful men in the world at the time, and effective master of Rome's eastern possessions. She wanted to leave nothing to chance, knowing that her future might depend on the impression she made. Her actual journey up the Sindus was far more splendid than what we've seen today. This was only a dry run, Perry suggested. The doctor snorted at the pun. Perry added quickly, "Kinda calculating, wasn't she?" The doctor's eyes narrowed reflectively. "I would say rather she was a product of her day." He sat up and waved an arm expressively across the marshes and shallow lakes of the Nile Delta to the horizon, disturbing a flock of ducks in a nearby pool, which took flight in a clatter of wings. This was the centre of the world for the people of this age, and the struggle was on for its dominance. Life was inherently hard, and for such stakes, practically any form of behaviour, however ruthless, was acceptable. The final prize would justify the means. You can hardly judge them by the standards of your own period. For a long while he was silent and thoughtful. Perry sensed he was looking back on his own past, contemplating more years and experiences than she could comfortably conceive. She felt a tingle run up her spine. Moments like this made her conscious of the gulf that would always divide them. Briskly, she got up and brushed off her knees and the front of her shorts. Despite her light clothes, she felt sticky in the humid warmth of the delta. Beside her, the doctor stood up and shook off his long, multicoloured frock coat, which he had been resting on. He seemed unfairly cool, as always. "I'll say one thing about photos, Doctor," she said, swatting the air as they made their way down the sandy slope. "The heat and flies don't come with them." Nestling in a hollow at the foot of the sandhill was the anachronistic form of an antiquated British police call box. As they walked up to it, Perry ventured, "If Cleopatra's arrival in Tarsus is so showy, I don't suppose we could—" "Not with that camera," he said firmly. "Tarsus would be far too public to risk it being seen, let alone the personal danger. Imagine the effect of a device like your camera falling into the wrong hands in the wrong age. Far worse than your pictures. The timeline might not stand the strain." He drew a key on a length of black ribbon out of an inner pocket. Perry was undaunted. "Well, can we go somewhere and see the sights then? I mean, properly mix with the people and such. Somewhere really old and classical." The doctor inserted the key in the door of the police box and smiled at her. "You exhibit your nation's renowned fascination with antiquity merely for its own sake. Has travelling with me not taught you yet that time is relative and simply a question of point of view? Maybe I'm simply not as jaded a traveller as you are, Doctor. I mean, what did you Time Lords build TARDISes for otherwise? And why keep all those different clothes in the wardrobe room? Anyway, can we try it?" He looked for a moment at her intent and eager face, and remembered when he too had been young, so long ago. He smiled suddenly, his face like an impish schoolboy. "Yes, I think we might at that." He opened the door of the police box, and they stepped into another universe. The Seeker followed the trail with senses that do not even have names. The trail ran through the millennia and across the light centuries. Mostly there was no pattern to its meanderings, and the trail might suddenly double back on itself for no reason. Sometimes it formed a complicated loop through the higher dimensions before continuing. On a couple of occasions, it actually branched into separate tracks and travelled parallel with itself before conjoining again. None of this troubled the Seeker. Time was irrelevant to it, and, as every sensation was a new one, tenacity and patience were simply experiences it had not encountered before. If any emotion could be applied to the Seeker, then it might be said to be happy. By analogy, it might be likened to an extra-cosmic cat chasing a yarn of wool between the stars and through the ages, trying to catch the unravelling ball at the end. External appearances can be deceptive, thought Perry, not for the first time. She and the doctor stood by the TARDIS's main console, which sprouted like a high-tech hexagonal mushroom from the control room floor. Outside the doors were the heat, sand, and flies of Egypt in 41 BC. Inside, it was timeless. As the doctor fussed over the controls, she looked around the spacious, white, coolly lit room that had become part of home for her in recent months. The room's irregularly curving walls were formed of many panels, patterned with vertical ranks of recessed circular mouldings, some of which glowed softly, occasionally broken by inset Doric-style fluted columns. Scattered about the room was an odd mixture of furniture that, perhaps, indicated the doctor's feelings for his favourite planet. A Sheraton chair, a Chippendale, a large Chinese pot belonging to a dynasty Perry had never heard of, and a massive brass-bound sea chest, from which had come the vintage telescope. On a carved stand was a bust of Napoleon, whilst on its twin was an ormolu clock. Perry had seen the doctor regularly wind and set the clock to match, presumably, ship's time, Except that seemed a little unlikely, considering the nature of the ship. The most brightly coloured object in the room was the doctor's flamboyant coat, which hung by itself on a tall hat stand. "I think Rome, about the year 150 AD by your calendar," the doctor said, lifting his gaze from the timeline display and beaming at Perry. "The rule of Emperor Antonius Pius. That should be the optimum period to see many of the great buildings at their best, whilst the social conditions were at their most stable. Something of a golden age by the standards of the time. I'll just check to find the precise destination details." He turned his attention back to the screen again. "Sure, that sounds fine, Doctor. Look, I'm going to wash some of this dust off, so take your time." She made for the doorway leading to the interior of the timeship, then hesitated. "Say, Doctor, we are going to try to blend in with the locals, right?" "Of course. That's the main point of the exercise." "So you won't be wearing your coat?" The doctor gazed almost regretfully at the gaudy item. "Unfortunately, it wouldn't match the local styles." Perry beamed. "That's great, Doctor. I can't wait to see you in a toga." "Here. Found it. Me found it. What you want is here." The voice was strange and harsh. It boomed as though projected by some giant speaker from a great distance, and the pitch and inflection varied between words, suggesting the language used was not simply unfamiliar to the speaker, but that speech itself was a novelty. The words might have been pieced together from a conversation overheard, and now repeated without the user quite being sure of their precise meanings. "Good, well done," said another voice. "Show me where it is located." These words were commanding, cool and clear, and without any uncertainty. "Yes, I see. Now, I'm going to tell you what to do next." Toweling herself off after her brief shower, Perry was only mildly surprised to find her ensuite bathroom now had a second door. Cautiously passing through it, she found herself by the side of the TARDIS's swimming pool. She was fairly certain that the door had not been there that morning. She was even more certain that the last time she had used the pool, it had been some way down the TARDIS's long, curving main corridor. Perhaps, she mused, if she went to check, she would find it still was down the corridor. After all, there were, as far as she knew, no rules about the behaviour of swimming pools in police telephone boxes. She wondered if the doctor had arranged this little trick of trans-dimensional engineering himself, or if some automatic system of the TARDIS had noted her regular use of the pool and rearranged things to be more convenient for her. She shrugged. She would find out later. Meanwhile, a cool plunge was an appealing idea. She hung up her towel and walked around the poolside to the high diving board, thinking that the decor was most appropriate considering their intended destination. Any self-respecting Roman emperor would approve of the acres of richly veined marble flooring, the massive classically styled columns that lined the pool itself, and the great hanging baskets that threw out sprays of colourful blooms, or trailed long exotic tendrils in the water. Of course, the classification of the plants would have been beyond him, but then they were beyond her as well, and she was a student of botany. Just one more item the doctor had picked up on his travels, she supposed. Curiously, the doctor never used the pool, as far as she could tell. Perhaps in some former incarnation he had been a keen swimmer, but it no longer appealed to his current personality. Perhaps the TARDIS was patiently maintaining the room for that day when its owner would once more require its facilities. How long might that be, she wondered. Beside the foot of the diving board steps was a small control panel mounted on a polished metal pillar. Perry made a careful adjustment to one of the controls, then climbed the steps 3 at a time in long, effortless strides, almost bouncing to the top board. Something no Roman emperor could possibly have owned, of course, was a pool with an adjustable gravity control. Perry stepped to the end of the board, flexed her knees, and thrust upwards, rising impressively in the low gravity. Her second spring was higher still, and the third took her nearly to the barrel-vaulted roof of the pool, which was decorated with a vividly coloured pastoral fresco. The style was somewhat reminiscent of the Sistine Chapel in Rome. This was unsurprising, as they were both painted by the same hand. Perry tucked her body and tumbled backwards, falling lazily out of the false sky of the fresco and down towards the sparkling waters of the pool. In the control room, the doctor entered the final set of coordinates into the navigation system and engaged the hyperdimensional drive. "All ready," announced the slow, booming voice, "but hard to see to read only what you want." "Well, read more around it if you have to," the commanding voice insisted. "Read more? How much?" "Read it all if you have to, but do it now. Understand? Reading all." There was a long pause. A pulsating, wheezing sound grew in volume, reverberating across the mudflats and disturbing the wildfowl once again. The incongruous telephone box faded into nothingness, like morning mist touched by the sun. "Why is it taking so long? Show me what you're reading." "No, not all of that as well. I meant just the not want all. Said you did want all. Not that. Have you no sense of proportion, you fool? Only read what you must. Never mind. Do it now." "But have read more now. What to do with it?" "And tell what is proportion. What is fool?" The water in the pool surged up in a great wave and engulfed Perry as she was contemplating her third somersault. She disappeared in a foaming, roaring confusion of bubbles and streaming shreds of pool plants. The pool's large double doors burst open under the pressure, and Perry and the contents of the pool poured out into the corridor. Her flailing hands caught hold of the rim of one of the circular wall mouldings, and she clung on desperately as a few hundred cubic yards of water rushed past her, sucking the breath from her lungs and tearing at each strand of her hair as it tried to peel her from the anchorage. Gradually, the flow subsided, receding along the curve of the dimly lit corridor. Perry slithered down the wall with the falling water level, coughing and drawing in rasping lungfuls of air, to finally slump in ankle-deep water in the angle with the floor. For a moment she was still. Then, grimly levering herself upright and pulling a sodden plant frond off her face, she drew in a deep breath. "Doctor!" she hollered. "What the hell is going—" Lights flickered and the corridor pitched under her. For a moment gravity failed, and she bounced off the opposite wall amid a shower of weightless water droplets. Then she was plucked out of the air and dropped heavily to the floor of the corridor again. She scrabbled up to the side wall and braced herself into the angle, leaning to keep upright. Down seemed to have changed direction, and now lay nearer the end of the corridor than below it. Perry was drawing in another breath to give vent to her feelings once more, when there was a rush and boom of water from the top of the corridor as a foaming wave broke around the curve and bore down on her. The contents of the pool had returned. She grabbed the edge of the wall moulding again. "Oh, shit!" The rest was lost in the rage of the water. The control room pitched and tossed like a ship in a hurricane. The doctor clung to the control console, scanning the madly flickering readings and warning lights and stabbing at buttons. Furnishings slithered across the floor, and the hat stand carrying his coat toppled gracelessly over. From somewhere outside the TARDIS came a howling and moaning, as though the craft were being buffeted by a great wind. A torrent of water poured in through the doorway and spread out into a shallow pool, depositing a sodden white bath towel, several plant fronds, and a bedraggled Perry on the floor. She rolled and slithered against the wall and grabbed the heavy sea chest for support. "What's happening?" she yelled over the noise, fear adding a shrill edge to her voice. "We seem to be caught on the edge of a massive distortion in hyperspace," he remarked, with rigid coolness. "An interdimensional energy flux tube has opened up, and we appear to be traveling along it. Can't we break free?" "I am trying," the doctor responded tersely. "Unfortunately, the energy is of a most peculiar form. It seems to be interfering with the controls somewhat. It would be rather unwise to try anything dramatic at this moment." "So we'll just have to sit it out, huh?" Probably. The doctor's gaze appeared to fix on the displays. "Don't kid me, Doctor. Tell it like it is." "The TARDIS's link with the Eye of Harmony has been broken, and I'm having to use reserve power to maintain the force field. The flux tube is also draining power from the systems." "So, how long will the reserve power last?" There was a crackling noise, and electric blue sparks danced briefly across the console, causing the doctor to jerk his hands off the controls. The room lights flickered and dimmed rapidly to a dull red glow. The heartbeat-like rise and fall of the time rotor visibly slowed. Perry could see the doctor's face illuminated by the ghostly glow of the control panel lights, which were flickering and dying too. "Not long, as a matter of fact," the doctor replied, with slightly strained understatement. "Didn't you work out some sort of new emergency system after the last time we had power trouble?" The doctor was becoming impatient. "Of course I did," he snapped. There was an awkward pause. "And?" "A standby mass converter is activated and begins transforming spare shell material into energy." The doctor scowled in annoyance. "It appears, however, that the automatic trigger has failed." "Can't you start it manually?" "The converter requires a certain power input to energize it before it can reach a self-sustaining output level. Unfortunately, we no longer have enough power left to initiate this process." "Oh, terrific!" Perry exclaimed bleakly. One by one, the lights were going out. The time rotor ground slower. Perry could sense the ship's systems fading around her, leaving them exposed to the elemental forces outside. She had experienced a power loss in the TARDIS once before, which had forced them to go to Varos, an unpleasant memory. But this was far worse. It felt almost as though the ship was dying. The air felt chill, and she was suddenly aware of being wet and naked and shivering in the encroaching darkness. She bit her lip against her rising fear, and said nothing in case her voice should give her away. Then she felt the doctor drape his coat over her shoulders, and gratefully she pulled it tight around her. The doctor sat down at her side, bracing himself against the wall to counter the motion of the ship. At least she was not alone. "How long can we last after all the power's gone?" she asked simply, forcing her voice to stay level. To her surprise, the doctor laughed. "My dear Perry, we aren't finished yet. You ask about time inside a time machine, where it does not behave in familiar ways. Time and energy are far more freely interchangeable here, so when there is a shortage of one..." His words slurred and deepened to inaudibility. The last lights faded out on the console. The time rotor ground to a halt. A water droplet sluggishly fell off the end of a strand of hair plastered across Perry's brow and slowed to a stop in mid-air. "Tell what is proportion. Tell what means fool. Why you no speak to me now?" There was no answer. "Oh, shit!" the rest was